critical race theory, we think about all of the boogeymen that have been made by conservatives across the country. But I'm also reminded of the concerted effort by strategists, Republican conservative strategists, to use their power against critical race theory. And we see it showing up all across the country. Joining me now to discuss this and so much more is Jennifer Cohn. She is an election security advocate and writer, an attorney, and a published author. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for inviting me on your show.
The pleasure is ours. I saw your work first on Twitter, and you were making some salient points as it pertains to critical race theory, but specifically the strategy that we see from the likes of Turning Points USA, Charlie Kirk, even Steve Bannon. What is the strategy that you have been tracking that's coming from the likes of those people as it pertains to critical race theory?
Sure. So kind of early on when I started researching election security in 2017, there was someone on Twitter named Amanda Blount who had sort of escaped from like a Christian right cult, I guess. And she did this thread about a group called the Council for National Policy. And I began researching it, and it's this very secretive, powerful group. Ann Nelson has written a book about it since then called Shadow Network. I did an article on it that did really well on Medium. It has sort of subgroups under it. It's an umbrella group for the religious right and sort of the economic liberty billionaires. Like the Koch brothers aren't in it, but they fund a lot of their projects. And so a lot of organizations under it include pretty much every major right-wing organization you can think of. Their leader has been or is in the CNP. So ALEC, which does the legislation, and the Federalist Society, which is the judges. And then you have the ones that seem to be involved with the school board takeovers significantly are the Leadership Institute, which it was founded by Morton Blackwell, I believe in the 60s, it might have been the 80s. And Turning Point USA, you mentioned Charlie Kirk, he's in it as well. And Steve Bannon was in it in 2014. He, of course, was Cambridge Analytica, but he's had his hands in Breitbart and the movement in Brazil. And so the CNP sort of seems to be like this unifying umbrella group. But the Leadership Institute in particular had said that it has posted to its website that the conservatives are training to take over school boards across the country. And the Leadership Institute doesn't get a lot of ink, but it really should, because they have trained literally thousands of, they call them conservatives, I would probably call them right-wing fascists, but from the ground up on how to use social media, how to spread propaganda, really the power of repetition, the power of creating narratives, a narrative to gin up moral outrage. That's kind of their big thing, is generating moral outrage. And they've trained all of the big leaders like Mitch McConnell and Karl Rove so they're a very dangerous group. And then Charlie Kirk is more sort of recent on the scene, and he is focused a little bit more on the youth. And I don't know how much training he provides. I think they probably do provide some, but he does things like paying teenagers to spread propaganda and putting fake Facebook accounts. And all of this is connected to their messaging, I believe, on the assaults on public education throughout the country. So it is less grassroots than it appears. I believe there is a coordinated strategy that comes from the top, and certainly they are working on it, where they're using critical race theory and mask mandates as a pretext for the ultimate goal of all of these people. And the CNP has expressly said it wants to eliminate the Department of Education, take over the public schools, and bring God into the classroom. Of course, this is their version of God, which is a very hateful, vengeful God, and doesn't like the LGBTQ community, et cetera. And so for someone like me, who's a Democrat and doesn't, believe in their crazy God, this is a very scary agenda. And I really wanted to call attention to it because there's a structure to all of this, the propaganda and, that we're seeing on TV.
Jennifer, I want to jump in and say, as a person who, as a Christian, I'm scared of their God. Like
Right,
their
exactly.
their their version of Christianity is the same one that would lynch black people on Saturday night or Sunday morning and then go to church. So the
Absolutely.
version of Christianity that Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk of Turning Points USA, and
And
now I'm
Morton.
learning about, I'm learning about all these new figures that I've studied the religious right for some time. But this institute that you're talking about, it sounds like it has been there consistently over the years, and we're seeing the fruits of their labor. Because if, as you describe their strategies around social media, I think at this juncture, everyone kind of has an intuition as to the top-down nature of this so-called grassroots movement. These people are using the same talking points. They're using the same tactics. They flood the comment sections in the same way,
Absolutely.
and they are delivering the same results, which is the precursor to them seizing that kind of power. Can you make it a little more plain for people who they may not know Steve Bannon, or they may not know Charlie Kirk as much as they know
Sure.
Steve Bannon, but could you just draw that straight line from all of this? Because you threw in the mask. The same people we're seeing showing up at the school board meetings and shouting against the mask mandates, they're connected to this as much as the people who are trying to get teachers kicked out for ostensibly teaching critical race theory. Expound on that a little more.
Um, well, right. So I think that it's not that there isn't anyone activating at the sort of grassroots level without coordination, but they have really been, the moral outrage and the whole concept of it, I believe, came from these think tanks, these right-wing think tanks like the Leadership Institute and Turning Point USA, and they are just both very, very active on all forms of social media. The Leadership Institute used to, before there was social media, it was just training on the television media and the print media. But that is what we don't have anything like this on the left. It's not the RNC. These are nonprofits, probably improper nonprofits, because my understanding of a 501c3 is it's supposed to be apolitical. And I mean, the Leadership Institute is a 501c3 and it is expressly political on its website. So, I think that they create this movement from the top, and then it does start to bubble up a little bit from the ground. So I wouldn't say that every person at those meetings is necessarily been trained directly by Turning Point USA or the Leadership Institute, but I imagine a lot of them are it's a few degrees of separation.
A few degrees, if any, because if you
Yeah.
look at what's happening in this pandemic, I what blows me away is the amount of outrage over what is common sense. But in order for their agenda to be accomplished, that's exactly what they're having to do. And obviously, we're seeing the results with how many people are dying, students being affected, teachers who are dying. What is that through line? What is the connecting strands between the outrage over mask mandates and critical race theory from your perspective?
Well, Morton Blackwell, one of his most famous quotes is that moral outrage is the most motivating force in politics. And they've trained people from Fox News also. This is their common tactic, is generating moral outrage. They do it over everything. And that is how they motivate people to go to the polls and to do whatever else they want to do. And in this particular instance, it's taking over the school boards. And so, yeah, I think they're both just a pretext for wanting to have Republicans take over the local school boards so they can either eliminate them in favor of private sort of Christian schools, or just have the states run a very limited, starved down version of public education. And I mean, they expressly want to bring God into the classrooms. That is what the Council for National Policy has said. So, and they have expressly said they want to eliminate the Department of Education. So they don't have the best interests of public education in mind. Right. They much prefer a very, very different type of education system.
What could you describe what that would look like, in addition to like just simply inserting God into schools? Right. And obviously we've unpacked this. Oh, everyone knows this over the years, that it's not that a student can't pray in school. It's that the school can't force the students to pray. Are you saying that that's not sufficient for this group? They want to make our public school system a theocracy.
They want to have, they said they want to have Bible classes.
Mm.
It's something I want to look into more what the specifics are, but something else that concerns me also is that they very much are in favor of, this school choice concept and redirecting funding toward private schools as
Hmm.
opposed to the public school system. And something that I read, which I mean is true, that the school choice movement began in response to desegregation in
That's
the
right.
schools, Brown versus Board of Education. And so I think that, when they want everything in general, they want everything privatized because, for one thing, that makes it a lot easier to discriminate based on race or sexual orientation or whatever it is. And they also just want control so that they can teach what they want to teach, which is a really hateful, non-inclusive
Yeah.
version of society. And
Mm.
and I think a theocracy, I mean, it is connected to what we're seeing in Texas. It's these same organizations. Again, the CNP has its fingers in all of these things, and then it has these subgroups taking care of them, and it's really very consistently well, if, toward Christianity. Basically, they sometimes will say Judeo-Christianity.
Right.
There are
Right.
some Jewish groups, very very conservative Jews, that have sort of joined with them. I don't think it's by any means the majority. I think it's a minority. And they formed an alliance, again, like I said, with the sort of billionaires who were more, they wanted what they called economic liberty, which meant, they could frack and all this stuff without any kind of regulation and destroy the environment. There was an alliance that they formed, those people, with the people who said they wanted religious liberty, which really meant shoving their version of Christianity down everyone's throats. And so somehow those two, they both wanted to kind of remake the schools, and so they found that in common. And here we are. So there's a target list. Charlie Kirk's group literally has a target list that's, I think, published on his website, and so you can go look at it. I haven't looked at it yet, but I did notice they're coming for California, and that it ties into the recall. By the way, they're all behind the recall.
Mm. The
It's in the
recall
insurrection.
of Governor Gavin Newsom. You said something, and I want us to
Yeah,
kind of spend some time thinking about the fact that there is nothing like this on our side of the equation. And so
right.
we're not just fighting against social media trolls. We're not just fighting politically, but we've yet to actually fight at this scale where we have entire institutes training people to fight on behalf of our issues. While
Right.
how many years ahead of us do you think the conservative movement is with this? 30, 40, 50, 60 years ahead of the
At
curve?
least 40. Yeah, no, well, I'm pretty sure I read the Leadership Institute started in the 60s. So,
Mm.
that would be more like 60 years. I think it got really going in the early 80s. That's when the Council for National Policy formed. So we're looking at about 40 years. And they have absolutely been playing the long game. Part of the problem with emulating it on the left is, but I think we do need some form of it, is again, this isn't the RNC versus the DNC. This isn't really, it's not really Jamie Harrison's job to do this, although it would be
Right.
nice. But this is private, well, they're nonprofits, but private groups forming this messaging, but they're happy to take dark money to do this, and money from billionaires. And the problem is, it's a good thing, but Democrats are not nearly as corrupt. There is corruption, absolutely, and there are some people who are very corrupt, but as a whole, they are not as corrupt. And as soon as you start having money flooding in to any cause, you become a little bit. The concern is that your hands become tied as to what your message can be,
Mm.
and then you have to kind of say what you have to fight for, what it is that they want. But it would be really nice if there were some Democratic billionaires who would fund this kind of thing and do it for the good, because messaging and target, it can be done for the good, or it can be done, for the greater good, or it can be done for destructive purposes. And I think they're doing it from selfish greed, theocracy, all of the things that I oppose,
Yeah.
and that most Democrats oppose.
I'm looking at that alliance that you said, the Koch brothers
Mhm.
aligning with this religious movement trying to seize the school boards. Describe the kind of future that these people want, because when I think about climate change, when I think about all of the obviously the pandemic now, when I think about what's going on in Texas, I mean, this is a powerful group of people who pretend as though everything is rooted in their sincere faith. But at the end of the day, that partnership with the Koch brothers really signifies to me that this is a massive power play for the entirety of this nation.
Well, I think it is a power play for the entirety of this nation. I mean, well, for example, what we're seeing in Florida and Texas with the crazies and the no masks and the pandemic spinning out of control because their version of liberty means no social responsibility.
That's it.
I mean, that's what they want for California. That's what Larry Elder is their candidate, the religious rights candidate. And I don't know if he ever was in the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, which is another one of these dangerous religious crazy groups, but he's spoken at
Mm,
their gatherings in the past. And Schlafly was a big member in the Council for National Policy. And so they want to destroy public education. I don't know exactly. I wish I did know the specifics of exactly what that entailed, but certainly defunding from the federal government because they want states' rights to teach whatever they want to teach. And of course, that sort of started with slavery. They wanted their freedom to enslave other people. I mean, that's the states' rights. And I think that I'm not saying they want to go back to slavery, but discrimination, absolutely.
yeah.
Um, and and they want, well, banning abortion obviously is number one on their list, and banning gay marriage, of course, and then just a really less inclusive, hostile. They're anti-immigration, and they're racist. I mean, that's the underpinning. Is that maybe less racist than where it began, but they are still
Mm,
absolutely racist. The whole thing with the religious right really formulated in the CNP. Paul Weyrich was one of the founders, and it
yeah.
really formed around they were worried about taxing of a school that was segregating.
Mm,
Remember what the case
yes.
was, but that's
Um, yeah. As soon as you mentioned it, it'll come to me. But continue. I'm sorry.
oh, it's okay. So that was actually really the motivating thing, but then they needed this moral outrage. It was kind of that they studied what gets voters excited, and they needed sort of a cover and a pretext for generating moral outrage, so they decided to latch on to abortion and call it murder. Most religious leaders at that time were not opposed to Roe versus Wade. This was like a decade later where they seized onto it for political purposes, to sort of just like they're doing with masks, wearing a mask to protect yourself and other people. That's the same thing. They seize on to these things for cynical, that they don't really care about themselves.
Mm,
Cynically to try to gin up. They look for divisive topics, and so I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I read The Handmaid's Tale a long time ago, and that comes up. I don't think we'll have to wear a hood exactly, but they didn't believe in the Equal Rights Amendment. They don't want minimum wage. They want a two-class society. They don't want any social safety net. They don't want universal health care. I mean, I just think and as resources, natural resources become squandered, or climate change causes more problems. It's a very dangerous situation where they don't see any responsibility for the societal good, and they want to hoard whatever there is,
mm.
there is that could be helpful for themselves, and have no responsibility to the rest of humanity, basically. And so that is not the kind of society I want my children
Absolutely.
raised in.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to me, and I appreciate your coverage of this and what you're working on. It's fascinating to me how effective rather they are at creating these wedge issues and getting those talking points disseminated from the top down. And you're right, there are absolutely are people who simply listen to this stuff that they put out and they believe it and they buy into it and they go directly and participate from their sincere heart, but they're not realizing that all of their information is coming from sources that have economic interest in a lot of, particularly, I mean, we say the Koch brothers, but everything in a lot of people's pantry, a lot of the products that are in their homes, right, come from the Koch brothers. And so there is a direct line. This is more about economics for a big portion of this country than it is about any type of moral outrage. Jennifer, I just really want the people to know where they can find more of your work so they can learn more about these things you're talking about.
Sure. I post daily on Twitter. I use it as my blog. So that's at Jenny Cohn 1, JennyCohn 1. And at the top of my profile page, I have a link to my Medium account as well. And then I also do have a YouTube account that I should use more than I do, but it's called Voting Machine Corruption.
Absolutely. Jennifer Cohn, thank you so much for keeping an eye on this. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
The pleasure's ours.